The Brain is the Body, Part 2. I believe that the term mental illness is misleading, as it implies all the problems that happen above the neck. With depression and with anxiety in particular, a lot of the problems may be generated by the mind and aggravate the mind, but have physical effects. For instance, the NHS website lists these as the psychological symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder. Restlessness, a sense of dread, feeling constantly on edge, difficulty concentrating, irritability, impatience, being easily distracted. But interestingly, the NHS gives a much longer list for the physical symptoms: dizziness, drowsiness and tiredness, pins and needles, irregular heartbeat, muscle aches and tension, dry mouth, excessive sweating, shortness of breath, stomach ache, nausea, diarrhea, headache, excessive thirst, frequent urinating, painful or missed periods, difficulty falling or staying asleep, insomnia. One symptom missing from the NHS list, but found on others, is both physical and mental: derealization. It is a very real symptom that makes you feel, well, not real. You don't feel fully inside yourself. You feel like you are controlling your body from somewhere else. It is like the distance between a writer and their fictional, semi-autobiographical narrator. The center that is you has gone. It is a feeling of the mind and the body, once again proving to the sufferer that to separate the two as crudely as we do is wrong and simplistic, and maybe even part of the problem. Famous people. Depression makes you feel alone. That's one of its main symptoms, so it helps to know you are not alone. Given the nature of our society, in a confessional celebrity culture, it is often famous people that we hear about having troubles. But it doesn't matter. The more we hear, the better. Well, not always. Being a writer, I don't particularly like thinking about Ernest Hemingway and what he did with his gun, or Sylvia Plath's head in her oven. I didn't even like contemplating too deeply non-writer Vincent van Gogh and his ear. And when I heard about a contemporary writer I admired, David Foster Wallace, hanging himself on September 12, 2008, it actually sparked in me my worst bout of depression since the really bad times. And it doesn't have to be writers. I was one of millions of people not just saddened by Robin Williams' death, but scared of it, as if it somehow made it more likely for us to end up the same way. But then, most people with depression, even most famous people with depression, don't end up committing suicide. Mark Twain suffered depression and died of a heart attack. Tennessee Williams died from accidentally choking on the cap of a bottle of eye drops that he frequently used. Sometimes, just looking at names of people who have suffered depression or are still suffering depression, but who clearly have or had other things that are great going on in their lives, gives a kind of comfort. So here is my list: Buzz Aldrin, Halle Berry, Zach Braff, Russell Brand, Frank Bruno, Alastair Campbell, Jim Carrey, Winston Churchill, Princess Diana, Richard Dreyfuss, Carrie Fisher, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Stephen Fry, Judy Garland, John Hamm, Anne Hathaway, Billy Joel, Angelina Jolie, Stephen King, Abraham Lincoln, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Isaac Newton, Al Pacino, Gwyneth Paltrow, Dolly Parton, Christina Ricci, Teddy Roosevelt, Winona Ryder, Brooke Shields, Charles Schulz, Ben Stiller, William Styron, Emma Thompson, Uma Thurman, Marcus Trescothick, Ruby Wax, Robbie Williams, Tennessee Williams, Catherine Zeta-Jones. And what does this teach us? That depression can happen to prime ministers and presidents and cricketers and playwrights and boxers and the stars of hit Hollywood comedies. Well, we knew that. What else? That fame and money do not immunize you from mental health problems? We kind of knew that too. Maybe it is not about teaching us anything, except that knowing about Jim Carrey's time on Prozac or Princess Leia's bipolar disorder helps us because, while we know it can happen to anyone, we can never be told too many times that it can happen to anyone. I remember sitting in a dentist, reading an interview with Halle Berry in which she was talking openly about the time she sat in her car, in a garage, and tried to kill herself via carbon monoxide poisoning. She told the interviewer that the only thing that stopped her was the thought of her mother finding her. It helped me, seeing her smiling and looking strong in that magazine. It may have been a photoshopped illusion, but whatever. She was alive and seemingly happy, and a member of the same species as me. So yes, we like stories of recovery. We love the narrative structure of rise, fall, rise again. Celebrity magazines run these stories endlessly. There is a lot of cynicism about depressed celebrities, as if after a certain amount of success and money, a human being becomes immune to mental illnesses. It is only mental illnesses that people seem to say this about. They don't say it about the flu, for instance. Unlike a book or a film, depression doesn't have to be about something. Also, one of the things depression often does is make you feel guilt. Depression says, look at you, with your nice life, with your nice boyfriend/girlfriend/husband/kids/dogs/sofa/Twitter followers, with your good job, with your lack of physical health problems, with your holiday in Rome to look forward to, with your mortgage nearly paid off, with your non-divorced parents, with your whatever, and on and on and on. Actually, depression can be exacerbated by things being all right externally, because the gulf between what you are feeling and what you are expected to feel becomes larger. If you feel the same amount of depression as someone would naturally feel in a prisoner of war camp, but you are not in a prisoner of war camp and are instead in a nice semi-detached house in a free world, then you think, crap, this is everything I ever wanted. Why aren't I happy? You may find yourself, as in the Talking Heads song, in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife, wondering how you got there, watching the days, wondering how things get on top, wondering what is missing, wondering if everything we have wanted in our lives has been the wrong thing, wondering if the smartphones and nice bathrooms and state-of-the-art TVs we thought were part of the solution are part of the problem, wondering if in the board game of life, everything we thought was a ladder was in fact a snake, sliding us right down to the bottom. As any Buddhist would tell you, an over-attachment to material things will lead only to more suffering. It is said that insanity is a logical response to an insane world. Maybe depression is in part simply a response to life we don't really understand. Of course, no one understands their life completely if they think about it. An annoying thing about depression is that thinking about life is inevitable. Depression makes thinkers out of all of us. Just ask Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln and the Fearful Gift. Abraham Lincoln, when he was 32, declared, "I am now the most miserable man living." He had, by that age, experienced 2 massive depressive breakdowns. Quote, "If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on the earth. Whether I shall ever be better, I could not tell. I awfully forebode I shall not. To remain as I am is impossible. I must die or be better." End quote. Yet, of course, while Lincoln openly declared he had no fear of suicide, he did not kill himself. He chose to live. There is a great article on Lincoln's Great Depression in The Atlantic by Joshua Wolf Shank. In it, Shank writes of how depression forced Lincoln into a deeper understanding of life. He insisted on acknowledging his fears. Through his late 20s and early 30s, he drove deeper and deeper into them, hovering over what, according to Albert Camus, is the only serious question human beings have to deal with. He asked whether he could live, whether he could face life's misery. Finally, he decided that he must. He had an irrepressible desire to accomplish something while he lived. He was evidently a serious person, one of the great serious people of history. He fought mental wars and physical ones. Maybe his knowledge of suffering led to the kind of empathy he showed when seeking to change the law on slavery. Wherever I hear another one arguing for slavery, I feel a strong impulse to see it tried on him personally, he said. Lincoln is not the only famous leader to have battled depression. Winston Churchill lived with the black dog for much of his life, too. Watching a fire, he once remarked to a young researcher he was employing, "I know why logs spit. I know what it is to be consumed." Indeed, he did. He was, in terms of career achievements, one of the most active men who ever lived. Yet, he continually felt despondent and full of darkness. The political philosopher John Gray, one of my favorite nonfiction writers, read Straw Dogs to see why, believes Churchill didn't overcome depression to become a good war leader, rather that the experience of depression directly enabled him to be one. Gray argues in an article for the BBC that it was Churchill's exceptional openness to intense emotion that explains how he was able to sense dangers that more conventional minds failed to see. For most of the politicians and opinion makers who wanted to appease Hitler, the Nazis were not much more than a raucous expression of German nationalism, writes Gray. It needed an unusual mind to address an unusual threat. Quote, he owed his foresight of the horror that was to come to visits of the black dog. Unquote. So yes, depression is a nightmare, but can it also be a useful one? Can it be one that improves the world in various ways? Sometimes, the links between depression, anxiety, and productivity are undeniable. Think of Edvard Munch's omnipresent painting, The Scream, for instance. Not only is this a most accurate visual depiction of what a panic attack feels like, but it was also, according to the artist himself, directly inspired by a moment of existential terror. Here is the diary entry. I was walking down the road when the sun set. Suddenly, the sky turned as red as blood. I stopped and leaned against the fence, feeling unspeakably tired. Tongues of fire and blood stretched over the bluish-black fjord. My friends went on walking, while I lagged behind, shivering with fear. Then I heard the enormous, infinite scream of nature. But even without the smoking gun of a specific depressive episode inspiring a specific work of genius, it is impossible to ignore the sheer number of greats who have battled depression. Even without focusing on the Plaths and the Hemingways and the Woolfs who actually killed themselves, the list of known depressives is staggering. And many times there is a link between the illness and the work they produce. A lot of Freud's work was based on his analysis of his own depression and what he believed to be the solution. Cocaine was what worked for him, but then, after dishing it out to other sufferers, he started to realize it could be a tad addictive. Franz Kafka is another member of the Depression Hall of Fame. He suffered from social anxiety and what people now see as clinical depression all his life. He was also a hypochondriac living in fear of physical and mental change. But being a hypochondriac doesn't mean you won't get ill. And when he was 34, Kafka contracted tuberculosis. Interestingly, all the things that were known to help Kafka's depression, swimming, horse riding, hiking, were physically healthy pursuits. Surely, the claustrophobia and sense of powerlessness in his works, so often interpreted in solely political terms, was also a result of him suffering from an illness that makes you feel claustrophobic? Kafka's most famous story is The Metamorphosis. A traveling salesman wakes up to find himself transformed into a giant insect who has overslept and is late for work. It is a story about the dehumanizing effect of capitalism. Yes, but it can equally be read as a metaphor for depression, the most Kafkaesque of illnesses. For like Gregor Samsa, the depressive can sometimes wake up in the room they fell asleep in, and yet feel totally different and alien to themselves, trapped in a nightmare. Likewise, could Emily Dickinson have written her poem, I Felt a Funeral in My Brain, without deep mental anguish? Of course, most depressives don't end up being a Lincoln, or a Dickinson, or a Churchill, or a Munch, or a Freud, or a Kafka, or a Mark Twain, or a Sylvia Plath, or a Georgia O'Keeffe, or an Ian Curtis, or a Kurt Cobain. But then, nor do most people. People often use the word despite in the context of mental illness. So and so did such and such, despite having depression, /anxiety, /OCD, /agoraphobia, /whatever. But sometimes that despite should be a because. For instance, I write because of depression. I was not a writer before. The intensity needed to explore things with relentless curiosity and energy simply wasn't there. Fear makes us curious. Sadness makes us philosophize. To be or not to be is a daily question for many depressives. Going back to Abraham Lincoln, the key thing to note is that the president always suffered with depression. He never fully overcame it, but he lived alongside it and achieved great things. Whatever greatness Lincoln achieved cannot be explained as a triumph over personal suffering, says Joshua Wolf Shank in that article I mentioned. Quote, rather, it must be accounted an outgrowth of the same system that produced that suffering. Lincoln didn't do great work because he solved the problem of his melancholy. The problem of his melancholy was all that the more fuel for the fire of his great work. End quote. So, even if depression is not totally overcome, we can learn to use what the poet Byron called a fearful gift. We don't have to use it to rule a nation like Churchill or Lincoln. We don't even have to use it to paint a really good picture. We can just use it in life. For instance, I find that being grimly aware of mortality can make me steadfastly determined to enjoy life where life can be enjoyed. It makes me value precious moments with my children and with the women I love. It adds intensity in bad ways, but also good ways. Art and political vigor are just one spillover of that intensity, but it can manifest itself in a million other ways, most of which won't make you famous, but many of which will, in the long term, add as well as take away. Depression is an internal war, a black dog, thanks to Winston Churchill and Dr. Johnson. A black hole, an invisible fire, a pressure cooker, a devil inside, a prison, an absence, a bell jar. I would be sitting under the same glass bell jar, wrote Plath, stewing in my own sour air. A malicious code in the operating system of your mind. A parallel universe. A lifelong fight. A byproduct of mortality. A living nightmare. An echo chamber. Dark and hopeless and lonely. A collision between an ancient mind and a modern world. Evolutionary psychology. A fucking pain. Depression is also smaller than you. Always it is smaller than you, even when it feels vast. It operates within you. You do not operate within it. It may be a dark cloud passing across the sky, but if that is the metaphor, you are the sky. You were there before it, and the cloud can't exist without the sky. But the sky can exist without the cloud. A Conversation Across Time, Part 3. Then me. It's terrifying. Now me. What is? Then me. Life, my mind, the weight of it. Now me. Shh. Stop that. You are just a bit trapped inside a moment. That moment will change. Then me. Andrea will leave me. Now me. No, she won't. She'll marry you. Then me. Ha! As if anyone would tie themselves to a useless freak like me. Would they? Now me. Yes, and look, you are making progress. You go to the shop now, and you don't have a panic attack. You don't feel that weight on you all the time. Then me. I do. Now me. No. There was that time last week when you were out in the sunshine walking through the park, and you felt a lightness, a moment you weren't really thinking. Then me. Actually, yes, that's true. I had another this morning. I was lying in bed, just wondering if we had any cereal left. That was it. It was just a normal thing, and it lasted over a minute, just lying there, thinking about breakfast. Now me. See? So you know things aren't always going to be the same. I mean, things today weren't always the same. Then me. But it's still so intense. Now me. And it always will be. You will always be quite intense, and the depression might always be there, waiting for the next fall. But there is so much life waiting for you. The one thing depression has told you is that a day can be a long and intense stretch of time. Then me. Oh God, yes. Now me. Well, then, don't worry about the passing of time. There can be infinity inside a day. Then me. I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself a king of infinite space. Now me. Hamlet? Impressive. I've forgotten all those lines by now. It's been a long time since university. Then me. I am starting to believe in you. Now me. Thank you. Then me. I mean, the possibility of you. The possibility that I exist more than a decade in the future, and that I feel a lot better. Now me. It's true, you do. And you have a family of your own. You have a life. It is not perfect. No human life is, but it is yours. Then me. I want proof. Now me. I can't prove it. There is no time machine. Then me. No. I suppose I'll just have to hope. Now me. Yes, have faith. Then me. I'll try. Now me. You already have.